Managing diabetes means you've got to be pretty mindful about what you eat, right? And protein is a big part of that conversation. Now, we often hear that protein is good for keeping blood sugar in check, but here's the twist. Not all protein is created equal, especially when it's packed with fat. Some of those high-fat proteins can actually make your glucose levels harder to manage. So in this discussion, we're going to explore 6 types of high-fat proteins that folks with diabetes should really be careful with. Top 6 high-fat proteins that worsen blood sugar control. Figuring out your meals when you have diabetes can feel like walking a tightrope, and protein is a really interesting piece of that puzzle. It's absolutely essential, no doubt about it, but when that protein comes with a lot of fat, things get a bit tricky. This mix of fat and protein can have a really complex and often not so great effect on your blood sugar, making it tough to keep those levels steady. So knowing which high-fat proteins are the culprits is super important for better blood sugar control and your overall well-being. Let's dive into the specific types of high-fat proteins that can throw a wrench in your blood sugar management, so you can make smarter choices about what you eat. 1. Fatty cuts of red meat. All right, first up on our list are fatty cuts of red meat. Now, if you're managing diabetes, that delicious, juicy steak or a rich lamb chop might seem tempting, but they bring a hidden challenge to your blood sugar control. We're talking about fatty cuts of beef, lamb, and pork. These are well known for being high in saturated fat, and that can really affect your glucose levels. And it's not just a quick blip after you eat. The effects can stick around and cause problems. You see, research has shown that when you eat proteins that are high in fat, it can actually slow down your digestion. Now you might think, hey, slower digestion, that sounds good. Maybe it stops a quick sugar spike? But for people with diabetes, it's a bit more complicated. This slowdown means your blood glucose can stay high for longer, especially in what's called the late postprandial period. That's about 2 to 5 hours after your meal. And there's more to it. Other studies highlight that this mix of fat and protein really adds up when it comes to your blood sugar. In one interesting finding, blood glucose levels went up by a hefty 5.4 mmol/ll 5 hours after eating fat and protein together. This kind of delayed spike can be super tricky to handle because it happens outside the usual time frame, when your meal-related insulin is working its hardest. This could lead to surprisingly high readings long after you've finished eating. So, opting for leaner cuts of red meat or looking for other protein sources is usually a much smarter move for keeping your blood sugar stable. 2. Full-fat dairy products. Moving on to our second category, full-fat dairy products. Think about those rich cheeses, heavy cream, and that creamy full-fat yogurt. They're common in many diets, and let's be honest, they taste great and have a wonderful texture. But if you have diabetes, these seemingly harmless treats can actually be quite a hurdle for keeping your blood sugar levels steady. And that's because they're loaded with both fat and protein. So when you eat these two nutrients together, which you do with full-fat dairy, it can lead to a situation where your blood glucose levels go up, not necessarily right away, but they stay elevated for a while. The main reason this happens is that the mix of fat and protein really stretches out your digestion time. Your body simply takes longer to break down and absorb these nutrients. This means glucose enters your bloodstream more slowly, but it keeps entering over a much longer period. For anyone managing diabetes, this slow, extended release means your blood glucose stays higher for longer than you'd want. Unlike foods that might give you a quick, sharp spike and then a fairly fast drop, full-fat dairy can lead to a more persistent state of high blood sugar. So even if they don't cause a huge jump in your glucose readings immediately after you eat them, they can contribute to poor blood sugar control overall. It's really important to understand this delayed effect when you're deciding about dairy in your diet. 3. Processed meats. Our third point concerns processed meats. We're talking about things like bacon, sausages, and various deli meats, items many people choose because they're quick, easy, and tasty. The issue here is that these products usually have a lot of fat packed in with their protein. This combination can be especially tricky for anyone with diabetes who's working hard to keep their blood sugar stable. The way dietary fat affects blood glucose isn't a mystery. It's been studied quite a bit. Research clearly shows that eating a lot of fat can cause your blood glucose levels to rise. For example, studies suggest that having about 35 grams of fat can push your blood glucose up by around 2.3 millimole/L. And for some people, especially those who are sensitive to dietary fat or are managing type 1 diabetes, eating about 50 grams of fat can mean they need a lot more insulin to handle that blood sugar increase. But it's not just the fat itself. The way processed meats are preserved and the different additives they often have can make things even worse for blood sugar control. These extra factors might mess with your metabolism or even contribute to inflammation. All of this makes processed meats a really tough food category for people with diabetes who are aiming for good health and steady blood sugar. That's why it's often a good idea to limit them or even steer clear altogether. 4. Fried proteins. Let's talk about number 4, fried proteins. Oh, that crispy fried chicken, those battered fish and chips, or any other deep-fried protein dish. They can be so tempting, can't they? But here's the thing. Frying completely changes the food's nutritional makeup, especially when it comes to fat. And that's a big problem for anyone managing diabetes. When you deep fry proteins, they soak up a lot of oil, and this massively boosts their total fat content. This extra fat has a direct impact on your blood sugar. We know from research that dietary fat can slow down your digestion, but even more importantly, a high fat intake can make it harder for insulin, whether it's the insulin your body makes or the insulin you take, to effectively move glucose from your blood into your cells. This is often called increased insulin resistance. So when proteins get fried, they basically hit people with diabetes with a double whammy. The protein itself, especially if you eat a lot of it, can cause a delayed rise in blood sugar. Then, all that fat absorbed during frying makes those high glucose levels stick around even longer, often way past that 5-hour mark after a meal. This extended period of high blood sugar makes it incredibly difficult to predict and manage your levels effectively. 5. Nut butters with added oils. Coming in at number 5 are nut butters with added oils. Now, nuts on their own, in their whole form, can actually be a really good addition to a diabetic diet. They give you healthy fats, fiber, and protein. But when we start talking about the nut butters you find in stores, things can get a bit more complex. A lot of popular brands of peanut butter, almond butter, and other nut spreads have added oils like palm oil or other vegetable oils. These are usually put in to make the texture smoother and stop the butter from separating. The downside is these added oils really bump up the overall fat content. This combination of high protein and high fat can be a real worry for blood sugar control. Research actually shows that eating large amounts of protein, we're talking 75 grams or more in one go, even if there isn't a lot of added fat, can lead to a significant delayed spike in blood sugar. This rise usually starts about 100 minutes after you eat and can peak around 5 hours later. So when you take these already protein-packed nut butters and then add even more fat from these extra oils, they can really contribute to that pattern of a delayed but noticeable rise in blood glucose. This makes it tough to manage your blood sugar after a meal because the increase happens long after you might expect the meal to have had its main effect. That's why choosing natural nut butters, the ones with no added oils or sugars, is definitely the better way to go. 6. High-fat plant proteins. And finally, our 6th category, high-fat plant proteins. With plant-based diets becoming so popular, there are tons of plant protein options out there now. And while many of them are fantastic choices, some can be surprisingly high in fat. We're talking about certain ways tempeh is prepared, some seitan products, and quite a few of those plant-based meat alternatives that are popping up everywhere. This hidden fat can really create a tricky situation for people with diabetes trying to manage their blood sugar. Studies have shown that protein can affect your blood glucose differently, depending on a few things, whether you eat it with or without carbs, and also how much fat is involved. For people with diabetes, these high-fat plant proteins can lead to a pretty complicated blood sugar response. On one hand, the protein itself can sometimes help make your body more sensitive to insulin, which is usually a good thing. But, and this is a big but, the high amount of fat that comes with these products really slows down digestion. This delayed digestion, much like what we see with high-fat animal proteins, results in your glucose levels staying high for a longer time. This prolonged rise can be especially hard to manage if you're using standard insulin routines that are designed for more typical carbohydrate-heavy meals. So, it's a delicate balance between the possible pluses of plant protein and the minuses of it being high in fat. Careful thought and watching your portion sizes are key here. Understanding the science behind fat-protein impact. So why do these high-fat proteins mess with blood sugar the way they do? It's actually a pretty interesting dance of what's happening inside your body. We generally know that things like fiber, protein, and fats can help slow down how quickly we digest and absorb carbohydrates. And usually that slowing effect is a good thing because it can stop those really sharp, sudden spikes in blood glucose right after you eat. But when your protein source is also loaded with fat, the story changes, and it gets more complex. What we often see then is a delayed, but often bigger and longer-lasting, rise in glucose levels. Research that specifically looked at people with type 1 diabetes gives us some really clear clues. When they eat protein, especially a good amount of it, their after-meal blood glucose levels definitely go up. But this increase doesn't happen straight away. It usually becomes noticeable about 2 to 5 hours after the meal. And because of that, they also need more insulin during that later period. It's this delayed reaction that makes managing blood sugar so tricky after you've had a high-fat protein meal. The rise happens outside the usual window when your mealtime insulin, like rapid-acting insulin, is supposed to be working at its strongest. This mismatch can lead to unexpectedly high blood sugar levels hours after you've eaten, long after you might think the meal's effects are over. And that, of course, makes it much harder to keep your blood sugar steady. Better protein choices for diabetics. So, with all this talk about tricky proteins, what are the better choices if you have diabetes? Well, it definitely doesn't mean you should skip protein altogether. It's all about choosing smartly. Lean proteins give you all the good stuff from protein without those troublesome effects that come with high fat. Think about excellent options like skinless chicken breast, different kinds of fish, especially those packed with omega-3s like salmon and mackerel. Just be mindful of how they're cooked. Egg whites and legumes. Lentils, beans, and chickpeas. Low-fat dairy products like Greek yogurt or skim milk can also be really good sources. These foods give you the benefits of protein, which can include making your body more sensitive to insulin and helping you feel full and satisfied. Research actually suggests that eating the right amount of protein can help stabilize your blood glucose levels right after meals. Plus, if you consistently eat a moderate amount of lean protein spread throughout your day, it can lead to more stable blood sugar control overall, helping you steer clear of those big swings from high to low. To wrap things up then, successfully managing diabetes really comes down to having a good grasp of how different foods and the mix of nutrients in them affect your blood glucose. Protein is absolutely vital for your health. There's no question about that. However, when protein sources are high in fat, they can really make your blood sugar control worse. These high-fat proteins often cause those delayed but significant rises in your glucose levels, which, as we've seen, can make things pretty challenging to manage. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever noticed your blood sugar going up unexpectedly hours after you've eaten high-fat proteins? Please do share your experiences in the comments section. And if you'd like more reliable, evidence-based nutrition tips for managing diabetes, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Oh, and don't forget to bookmark this information so you can easily refer back to it next time you're planning your meals or doing your grocery shopping.